Politically, it is identified with the fact that there are now more and more people involved in the political process. And the reason why Jackson is a success is he is able to tap in to that energy. He is able to, along with the Democratic Party, he is able to rally the people who are now engaged in the political processes. Voting is no longer a process for the elites. It is a process for the masses. So Jackson and the Democrats are able to tap into that first, okay? Which is why Jackson is usually referred to as a representative of the common man. So as we go through and we evaluate the Jackson presidency, okay, and we look at the things that he did, and we look at the things that others did, Van Buren, Harrison, okay, maybe even Tyler, what we want to do is we want to see how well do these politicians address the needs of the common man. And a very good question that can be asked of this is, did Jackson effectively represent the interests of the common man? When we look at what he did, decided, does that help or hurt the common man? So that's really where we're at. So as we're looking through this stuff, that's what I want you to keep in mind. All right? So the election of 1828, after the hoo-ha of the corrupt bargain, after all that, tomfoolery, the Democrats organized themselves to get Andrew Jackson elected in 1828. And just to show that he's a different kind of president, Jackson is going to open the doors to the White House on Inauguration Day to everybody who wants to show up. And they literally had a kegger in the White House. Free alcohol, free food. It was a party for everybody. All right? So just the symbolism of opening the White House to the average person, I think helps cement that reputation that Jackson has as a representative of the common man. Now, poor old Andy Jackson had to be whisked out the back door. The crowd in there got a little tipsy. The curtains got ripped down, the china got broken, the carpets got all muddied and stuff. That's okay. I mean, you've been to a party or two. And that's what happened here at the White House. But it's a new kind of politics in 1828, okay, where you're going to now have to appeal to Joe Sixpack, Joe Barcalounger, okay, Joe Everybody. Prior to Jackson, the people who were voting were wealthy landowners, white landowners. Universal white male suffrage gets rid of the land qualification, so now any white guy can vote. Any Joe Slob can vote. All right? So you're going to have politicians who are going to be appealing to Joe Barcalounger, Joe Sixpack. Let me... Hello? There we go. All right. There's nothing wrong with the name Joe. Nothing at all. All right, so even Andrew Jackson's nickname, Old Hickory, evokes an image. When you think of Hickory, what do you think of? Backwoods. Banisters. Fantastic. Awesome. What else do you think of? Hickory. Tough. That's right. Hickory is a tough wood. It's what the word I like to use is hardscrabble. But it's not easily kind of guy that Andrew Jackson is trying to convey. I am going to be a warrior for the people, and I'm not going to bend. I'm not going to be broken. I'm going to be out there fighting for you. He was old. Okay, so hence the old man voice. I mean, some people looked at him as an old coot. But he was much more than that. I mean, this idea of a backwoodsman, a frontiersman. This is the first president from west of the Appalachian Mountains. Keep that in mind. So he's a Westerner. Okay? He's from Tennessee. All right? That's the frontier at this point. That's the frontier. So this represents a whole new way of doing things. And he's going to try and milk that frontier image for as much as he can get out of it. And so if he portrays himself as a common man through his nickname Old Hickory, and that evokes a certain something in people's minds, then that's great. But I will tell you right now, Andrew Jackson was a wholly uncommon man. He tries to portray himself as a common man, but he is wholly uncommon. He is one of the wealthiest landowners in America. He's got over 100 slaves. Guys, when your house has a name, you're uncommon. How many of you live in a house with a name? Nobody. Okay? But when your house is the Hermitage, that's not exactly common man. But he portrays himself as a common man because the Andrew Jackson story is the story of the common man made good. He comes from nothing. Nothing. I mean, the guy is an orphan at age 15, wandering around the backwoods of North Carolina, getting drunk and betting on the ponies. And yet, he's able to, out of that nothing, make something of himself. So I think he sees that as, my story is great. Wouldn't it be terrific if other people had that same adventure in their life? That you can, in America, make something from nothing. All right. Now, when we look at the presidency of Andrew Jackson, there are going to be 5 key things that we are going to look at. We're going to look at first what's called the spoils system. This is a game changer in politics at this point. And Jackson sees it as a battle against what he calls the elites. And that's the way Jackson approached politics. For Jackson, everything was a battle. And he's a general. So that's how his mind operates. I mean, get inside the guy's skin, all right? It's me against whomever. With the patronage system, it's me against the elites. With the tariff controversy, it's me against John C. Calhoun. I mean, the tariff issue is this big, huge issue, but he boils it down to me and Calhoun. The Peggy Eaton affair, me and Calhoun. Calhoun, as you can see, becomes a bit of a thorn in his side. Indian removal, it's me and John Marshall. The bank war, it's me and Henry Clay. So he takes politics with these big, huge, complex issues, and in his mind, he simplifies it. So you don't need to have a European education and know 5 languages and, be the smarty pants that, if that were the case, John Quincy Adams would have been the greatest president we've ever had. No. What you do is you take issues and you simplify them and deal with them in that way. And that's what Jackson does. So when we look at these issues, which we're about to do, keep in mind that it's Jackson versus somebody else. Okay. So, the spoil system. What is it? There's another word for it. It's called patronage. Literally, it means to get government jobs. And who are we going to give government jobs to? Andrew Jackson says we should give government jobs to the people who helped us get elected. That will build party loyalty. Why would you go out and risk your neck? Why would you go out and work long hours? Why would you go out and do all the legwork that you're going to do to get this guy elected president? Because on the back end, there is the promise of a government job. So you can feather your own nest. You can make something of yourself. So Jackson, in doing this, builds what today is the modern party structure. I mean, when Barack Obama came into office in 2009, he brought his own people with him. Every president does that. Okay? That's how you build loyalty. That's how you get people to campaign for you, is the promise that on the other end, there's going to be a job available for you. So it rewards loyal party workers with government jobs. And Jackson called it rotation in office. He saw it as a way of getting rid of elites who had been in government jobs for too long. Jackson's attitude was any idiot can do these jobs. Just give them a sheet of paper with a couple of bullet points on it. This is what your job entails. Plug somebody in and let them go. That was Jackson's attitude toward government jobs. So a lot of people who had been in government service for 10, 20, 30, some 40 years were fired when Jackson became president. They were removed. So all the guys who knew where the staplers were kept, all the guys who knew, where the bodies were buried politically, they are removed and replaced with Jackson loyalists, which is fine. Does it represent the interest of the common man? Let's just say this. It represents the interests of the common man. How? Okay, they're getting access where they had not previously had access before. They are now gaining access to the reins of power, to the levers of power. You've got people in office who had not previously had that access. How does it hurt the common man? Because it does. Yeah.
It shows that he has the power just to remove everybody from office and replace them.
Well, that is true. You're kind of beholden to the patronage. Jackson is your patron. Jackson is the guy who's responsible for getting you this job. He's also responsible for you losing your job, if that is the case. How else might this be harmful to the common man? Yeah.
Too much power.
Explain.
They could get power hungry and try to do more than they're supposed to be.
They could get power hungry and maybe abuse their office, and so therefore the people's work is not getting done, but they're too busy worrying about how can this, if I know that I'm only here for a temporary amount of time, how can I milk the most money or the most power or the most influence out of this job? And maybe they're not concerned about the issues of everybody else. They're just concerned with their own well-being. So, for instance, if I'm named Secretary of War and I'm responsible for getting government contracts for the military, maybe I'm worried about, accepting bribes and stuff from contracting companies to get them jobs so I can feather my own nest with as much money as humanly possible before I'm turned out and replaced by the next guy. And that doesn't help anybody. Yeah.
I was thinking sort of be like, oh, everybody wants to work for the government, so it's kind of be like that everybody not doing what they could be doing, like farming or whatever, waiting to be a movie star or something, putting all their
Having unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
And maybe if your expectations aren't met, doing something about it. I mean, that comes to a head eventually. There are going to be people who work for presidential campaigns who expect certain things, and when they don't get them, they're going to turn to violence. I mean, you have the death of a president over this. James Garfield was shot in 1881 by a guy who thought he deserved a government job, who didn't get one. Of course, he was none. All right. So, there's an upside to the spoil system, to patronage, to rotation in office. The upside is people gain access to the levers of power who hadn't previously had it. The downside is it can lead to corruption. And you've got people, I mean, can you imagine if I named you Secretary of State tomorrow? Would you know what to do? Would you know where to go? I mean, just the look on your face says it all. You wouldn't know what to do. You wouldn't know where to go. Okay? I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're given a responsibility that you've never had previous experience doing before, I mean, there's a learning curve. And if you're constantly replacing these people over and over again, you've got all these people learning on the job. And so that's not a very efficient way to govern. But it does give you access. And Jackson, you know what? Jackson really didn't give a crap about his cabinet anyway. Yeah, he had a cabinet. He named people to his cabinet. I think he had 5 secretaries of the Treasury. I think he had like 4 secretaries of war, 3 secretaries of, or 3 attorney generals, 2 vice presidents, and a partridge in a pear tree. You're welcome. And to Jackson, it didn't matter, okay? Because when he wanted advice, he just went to his friends. These are his drinking buddies. These are his gambling buddies. These are the people that Jackson has known for years. Now, you'll never need to know the name Amos Kendall or, well, you may need to know Johnny. Duff Green here, Gandalf, or Herschel. Anybody watched Walking Dead last night? Little katana action for you. And old Marty Van Buren. These were Jackson's trusted inner circle, an informal group of people that Jackson would get together with, people he could trust, people who had been around Jackson for years. And guys, I'll tell you right now, that's one thing Jackson valued above all else: loyalty. I don't care if you're competent. I don't care if you know what your job is or how to do your job, so long as you are loyal to me. That's what Jackson valued most. So these were the people who gave him advice that he could trust because he had known them a long time. They were called the kitchen cabinet because they were kind of informal. I mean, some of these guys held positions. Like Amos Kendall, I think, had been Postmaster General. John Eaton had been Secretary of War for a while. Martin Van Buren had been Secretary of State. He eventually goes on to become Vice President. So yeah, Duff Green. Duff Green was just an old drink. So yeah. All right. Jackson comes into office. Day 1, kegger at the White House. Day 2, he's got an issue he's got to deal with. It's called the Tariff of 1828. By a lot of people, it is referred to as the Tariff of Abominations. Abominations. You may not know what the word abomination is, but is it generally good or bad? Bad, yes. And guys, that is an easy way to get through big words. This college level vocabulary that we're dealing with here in this course, if you can figure out whether the word is generally good or bad, that will help you decipher what these words are. An abomination is a monster. And this tariff, for a lot of people, is a monster tariff. Remember, as part of Henry Clay's American system. You had a bank, you had a proposal for internal improvement funding, and you had a protective tariff. Now, you got that in 1816. You had a tariff in 1816. But in 1828, Congress is going to take that protective tariff and jack it up. So it's a tariff on steroids. Okay? And it was pushed mainly by New Englanders to get protection for New England textile industries. Now, that's great if you're if you're a factory owner. It's great if you are a worker working in the factory because that's job security. But who does a tariff hurt? People in port cities who may be relying on import-export businesses because tariffs definitely reduce international trade. If you're putting a tariff up on imports, you're not going to be able to export to that country because they're not going to want to trade with you. They're going to reciprocate. Yeah.
Farmers.
Farmers. Why farmers?
Because they have to keep up with all this supply, and states like South Carolina can't really keep up with all that.
What do you mean keep up? I don't know what you mean.
They can't produce enough.
Well, production has nothing to do with a tariff. Okay? If they're producing, that's great. And look, South Carolina is producing rice and cotton. Georgia's producing cotton. Mississippi is producing cotton. Alabama is producing cotton. All right? The Chesapeake is still producing tobacco. It's producing corn. It's producing hogs. Okay? The problem with a tariff is that it reduces opportunities for trade. And those agricultural states rely on trade. Not just to get their exports out to the rest of the world, but the South relies on imports, a lot of imports, because they don't make anything in the South. They just grow. So they have to import everything that they bring in. That is a weakness of the Southern system, is that they rely too much on imports. So when you raise the tariff and you make goods more expensive, it's going to hurt farmers. It's going to hurt poor people. It's going to hurt those folks who rely on imports in the South, in the West. Northern industries, they love it. The northern wealthy, they get wealthier. Southerners, farmers, okay, they're hurt by this. And so that's why Southerners and poor people are going to be opposed to this tariff. Now, if we're going to think about Andrew Jackson, and Jackson proclaims to be the paragon of the common man, which side do you think Jackson would come down on this tariff? What would he support? The Southern farmers, absolutely. They're the common man, right? Jackson supports the tariff. I'm not saying he likes it. He supports it. Now, why does he do this? Because at least he knows his job description. The president executes laws. The president doesn't make laws. The president doesn't interpret laws. The president executes the law. Congress passed this law, this tariff. He, as a strict constructionist, strictly reading the Constitution, Jackson sees this as, okay, the will of the people has spoken. He sees Congress as the body of government that represents the will of the people. I am the representative of the people. They apparently wanted this because it got voted on. And so my job is to execute that law, as much as I may not like it. And he says to people, he says in his correspondence, guys, if you don't like this tariff, get the votes to overturn it. And I'll execute that. But my job is not to interpret law. It's not to, get rid of laws. My job is to enforce the law. This is the law of the land, and my job is to enforce it. Others don't see it that way. In particular, South Carolina is going to rail against this tariff and organize protests in opposition to this tariff. It becomes known as the nullification crisis. Now, we have dealt with the idea of nullification before. Where did we see it before? Yeah.
The Virginia and Kentucky
Virginia and Kentucky resolutions.
resolution.
Jefferson and Madison make the argument that the Alien and Sedition Acts are unconstitutional, therefore, states have a right to declare a law null and void. We don't have to follow it because it's unconstitutional, and we've made that call. The state of South Carolina says, we don't like this tariff, so therefore, we're not going to follow it. Now, if you look at this cartoon, I'm not going to go too much into this cartoon. If you start down that road, this cartoon is trying to convey that if you start down the nullification road, it can only lead to one place: civil war. Because if you've got states that are saying, I'll follow this law but not that law, and that state says, well, I'm not following that law, but I'll follow that law, you don't have a union. You've got individual states doing their own individual things. We've been down that road before. It was called the Articles of Confederation, and it was a failure. But South Carolina is going to try to promote this idea that states have the right to declare a law null and void. Now, the guy at the center of this argument, the guy who is promoting this argument, is Jackson's own vice president, John C. Calhoun. He is an interesting figure in American history. He starts off as almost a federalist, a nationalist. He believed in decisions based on the nation's interest. This is the guy who had co-sponsored the bonus bill back in 1816 with Henry Clay. Yet, as time goes on, as his native South Carolina becomes more and more entrenched in slavery, cotton production, rice production, you're going to see John C. Calhoun evolve and become less of a nationalist and more of a sectional leader. By 1850, John C. Calhoun comes to be the voice of the South. Not the voice of the nation, the voice of the South. And it's amazing to watch that transformation from 1816, where he's talking about a system of interlocking, canals and roads being built for the benefit of the entire nation, to 1850, where he says, if you don't let us have our slaves, I'm going to demand that the South secede. Boom! That's an amazing transformation. Calhoun is going to be the guy who argues for the nullification of the tariff in a letter that is called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Basically, it says, this is why we don't like the tariff. This is why we're declaring it null and void. this is what South Carolina is all about. It lays out the South's argument. Jackson knows that it's Calhoun, even though the letter is penned anonymously. He knows it's Calhoun. He's not an idiot. And so Jackson starts to take this huge tariff controversy and personify it. This is my own vice president fighting against the nation's interest. And so Jackson turns it into a battle between him and his vice president. Now look, the South, and in particular South Carolina, did not like the tariff. And the argument here is, look, man, if the federal government can force us to swallow this tariff, what else can they force us to swallow? The unwritten thing associated with the nullification crisis and the tariff controversy is slavery. If they can force us to abide by this tariff, they can force us at some point to abolish slavery. If we don't stand up to the federal government here on this, later down the road, they're going to come for our slaves. So South Carolina saw this as, and saw the tariff controversy as almost a metaphysical infringement on their liberties. Our freedoms are at stake here. So on one side, you got Andrew Jackson wanting to enforce the law. On the other side, you've got the vice president saying this is about the freedom of states to decide what they want. What becomes known as the argument for states' rights. Jackson goes so far as to threaten military action against South Carolina. He says, I will personally lead an army into South Carolina if this continues, and I will take every treasonous person and hang them from the nearest tree that I can find, starting with my own vice president. You've got a president threatening to kill his vice president. Now, this coming from a man who already had 2 bullets lodged in his chest from previous duels. That's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. So this is building to a head. And this crisis lasts for 5 years. I mean, it's not a quick and done thing. The battle spills over into the Senate, where the idea of states' rights, it starts as a tariff controversy, but it goes into this larger idea of what is the nature of our country? Is it a unified country, or is it a country of individual states doing their own things? Robert Hayne, who is the senator from South Carolina, argues you cannot have federal authority and be able to protect individual liberties and states' rights. It's impossible to do that. Daniel Webster, senator from Massachusetts, makes the famous retort, you can have liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. What Webster is trying to say is you can have national authority plus respect for individual and states' rights. You can have both. Haynes says you can't. Webster says you can. By the way, if there were ever going to be a line inscribed on a man's tombstone, this is Daniel Webster's tombstone line. Liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. They're known as the Webster-Hayne debates, and it's essentially over the issue of federal authority and states' rights. Now, as if the nullification crisis is not, by the way, and let's put this in context. Let's put this in context. This is let's put it at 1830. That's a nice round number. That's right in the middle of the nullification crisis. It starts in 1828, ends in 1833. 1830. 10 years previous to this, you had the Missouri controversy, which threatened like a fire bell in the night to awake and rouse us with terror. I considered it at once as the death knell of the Union. Thomas Jefferson, 1821. And now, 10 years later, you've got a debate over this tariff, which is also threatening to rip the country apart. Guys, it's almost like you've got national figures trying to hold this country together with, spaghetti noodles. Very overly boiled spaghetti noodles. It's becoming more and more difficult to balance the sectional interests. At the end of the War of 1812, everybody was on the same page. National interest trumped sectional issues. But as time goes on, can I take my slaves to Missouri? Will you ram this tariff down my throat? Are you coming to get my slaves later on? You're starting to see sectional issues take a more prominent role in American politics. And Jackson sees himself as a nationalist, as a person whose job it is to protect the Union. So for Jackson, this whole debate, I'll solve it by sending an army into South Carolina. Oh, great. Fantastic. Why don't you start a civil war in 1830? But as if this wasn't bad enough, as if it wasn't bad enough that you had a president at a dinner basically staring down his vice president. I mean, it almost came to blows. It's called the Battle of the Toasts. They're at opposite ends of the table. Jackson gets up. He looks at Calhoun. He stares him down. And he says, the Union, something like that, the Union, it must be, our federal Union, it must be preserved. And without missing a beat, Calhoun gets up and he stares Jackson down. And he says, the Union, next to our liberty, most dear. For Calhoun, states' rights and individual freedoms are more important than the national interest. For Jackson, the nation's interest is paramount. As if this wasn't bad enough, at the same time this is happening, you got the wives involved. The wives now get involved. Guys, if there was a slam book for cabinet wives, Peggy Eaton would be all over that slam. Do you guys even know what a slam book is? Did anybody ever see the movie Mean Girls?
Yeah.
Okay, this is antebellum Washington, D.C., Mean Girls. That's what this is. Okay? Peggy Eaton, and you've seen the name Eaton before. John Eaton. This is John Eaton's wife, Peggy. And the other cabinet wives don't want to have anything to do with Peggy Eaton. In particular, the grande dame of the cabinet wives Mrs. John C. Calhoun. Mrs. John C. Calhoun and the other cabinet wives regularly diss John Eaton's wife. Now, who is John Eaton at this time? He is Secretary of War. Johnny. Why on earth would these girls want to isolate and ostracize one of their own? Think about it, girls. Why do you isolate and ostracize each other and cause each other to have, disorders and whatnot? I'm going to insult her so much she's going to find out what Ladies, she is a woman of ill repute. She has gotten around. And the fine ladies of the other cabinet members, the wives of those cabinet members, they don't want anything to do with a woman of such loose moral standards. Now, what is the story behind Peggy Eaton? I will tell you very quickly. Peggy Eaton was once Peggy Timberlake. And Peggy Timberlake was married to a naval officer named John Timberlake. Now, John Timberlake, being a member of the United States Navy, often found himself away from home on long extended cruises in the Navy. So while John Timberlake was away, Mrs. Timberlake would play. And she got to know a lot of the people in Washington, D.C. And by know them, I mean know them in a biblical sense. Now, everybody knew who Peggy Timberlake was in Washington, D.C. And they all knew she was the good time gal. And so she had this reputation. So when Andrew Jackson comes to Washington, D.C., and brings his coterie of people with him from Tennessee, one of the guys he brings with him is John Eaton. And John Eaton gets to know the married Mrs. Timberlake. So much so that he goes to great lengths as Secretary of War to make sure that poor old John Timberlake's Navy vessel is constantly out on patrol, so that he's never around, so that Eaton can shack up with Timberlake's wife. Timberlake is so distraught by this, he commits suicide by hanging himself from the yardarm of his boat, climbs the mast, and hangs himself in the Mediterranean, where he's on patrol. Now, Mr. Timberlake is out of the way, and John Eaton can marry Peggy and make an honest woman out of her. And they get married. Now she's a cabinet wife. But the other cabinet wives don't want to have anything to do with her, and so they ostracize her. They don't invite her to the parties and get-togethers and nail polishing things and cream sales and whatever, shake sales, Shakeology or whatever it is. I don't know, my wife has all these freaking sales. It's just an excuse for them to all get together and drink wine and complain about their husbands. Anyway, so she is ostracized, and the person ostracizing her is Mrs. Calhoun. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Peggy Eaton goes to Andrew Jackson and says, "The other cabinet wives aren't playing with me. I feel so bad, and they treat me so awful. And Andrew Jackson says, sweetheart, I know what you're going through. I totally sympathize with you. They treated my wife the same way. These elites have treated my wife the same way. As a matter of fact, Rachel Jackson died 2 weeks after Andrew Jackson was elected president. So she never even made it to the White House. And Jackson blamed his political critics for causing her to die of a broken heart because Mrs. Jackson had been the target of unfair criticism during the campaign, in particular the fact that she had been a divorcee, that she had been married previously. And so the campaign of John Quincy Adams was spreading the rumor that Rachel Jackson was, for lack of a better term, a whore. And Jackson blamed his critics. In particular, blamed Henry Clay. Henry Clay killed my wife. She died of a broken heart. Jackson had a portrait of Rachel Jackson in the White House dressed with black bunting. He used to sit in bed and talk to it. Oh, yeah. So when Peggy Eaton comes to Andrew Jackson and says, the ladies aren't treating me right, Jackson says, don't worry, sweetheart, I'll fix it for you. And he goes to John C. Calhoun, in the middle of this nullification crisis, mind you, and says, I want you to tell your wife to treat Peggy Eaton with some respect and invite her to all your parties. And John C. Calhoun says, are you kidding me? I can't get my wife... You're threatening to hang me, and now you're telling me to tell my wife who to invite to... I can't work under these conditions. I cannot work under these conditions. I resign. John C. Calhoun becomes one of only 2 vice presidents in American history to resign the office. Because he can't work under these conditions. And so, the Secretary of State organizes the resignations of all the remaining cabinet members. Basically, from this incident, the entire cabinet resigns at once. Can you imagine Barack Obama's cabinet resigning en masse on one day? Boom, done. All because of the Peggy Eaton affair. In the middle of this nullification crisis. Are we busy doing the people's work? Or are we dealing with our own little petty jealousies and petty problems? To me, Jackson's losing focus here. And everybody else seems to be losing focus here, too. The fact that Van Buren got the cabinet to resign demonstrated to Jackson that Van Buren was a loyalist. And Jackson valued loyalty above all else. So in 1832, he names Martin Van Buren his vice president. Which is how you wind up with President Van Buren instead of President Calhoun. All right, so how does it all end? It ends like a lot of other controversies end, with a compromise written by Henry Clay. Henry Clay had authored the Missouri Compromise to end that crisis. He is going to end this crisis also with a compromise tariff. Clay says, oh, by the way, this is Clay, this is Calhoun. I know he looks like a wolf man. Clay says, okay, South, you don't like the tariff. North, you feel like you need protection of your industry from foreign competition. All right, so both sides get something here. We're going to keep the tariff rate in 1833 at the level of the 1828 tariff. But over the next 10 years, we're going to lower the tariff rate back to where it was in 1816. So South, you'll eventually get a lower tariff. North, you've got 10 years to get your act together and make yourselves competitive on the international market in terms of manufacturing. Compromise? Done. Crisis averted for now. Spoil system, tariff issue. 3 other issues to deal with Jackson, and very little time to do it. Indian removal. At the same, guys, this is 1830, so it's happening at the same time as the tariff controversy. Notice, though, where Indians are being removed from. The Deep South. The 5 civilized, well, they're called the 5 civilized tribes because they had an alphabet and governmental structure and democracy and whatnot. They were trying to emulate the white government of America. They are being forcibly removed from the southeast. What? Look at that map. Why are they being moved? What? Cotton. Absolutely. This needs to be open for cotton production. And Jackson's not an idiot. This is during the middle of the nullification crisis. So what he's doing is he's trying to isolate South Carolina by giving the other southern states goodies. Hey, don't throw your lot in with South Carolina. Look what I'm doing for you. I'm getting rid of your Indians for you. I'm helping you out. I'm your buddy. Who's your buddy? Who's your pal? Andrew Jackson's your buddy. Andrew Jackson's your pal. And so Jackson is trying to isolate South Carolina during the nullification crisis by removing the Indians from the rest of the Deep South states to open that up for cotton production. Does it benefit the interests of the common man to get rid of the Native Americans? Yes. How?
More land, more opportunity.
More land, more opportunity for everybody. The rising tide lifts all boats. Of course, it's really going to lift the boats of cotton planters, so it really benefits the rich and the wealthy. But on the surface, it looks like an opportunity here. You've got more land available for people to exploit that land there. Now, one element of the population where this is a downside, Native Americans. They are removed forcibly, without a treaty, without due process. They are just removed. Now, they're not going to go quietly. Sequoia and the Cherokee are going to take their, and by the way, that's the alphabet that the Cherokee developed. They developed their own alphabet, their own language. Yeah. Really? You can get the Cherokee keyboard on your iPhone. There you go. Will it translate English to Cherokee? Now, that's interesting. I mean, does anybody even use the Cherokee alphabet anymore? Yeah, I think it's a dead language. But, I mean, this was an attempt. This was an attempt by Native American tribes to make themselves more civilized. They had newspapers, writing, government, they had elections, they had democracy, they had a constitution in the Cherokee Nation. And yet Andrew Jackson didn't give a crap about any of that. He wanted them removed. They are Indians. They are different from white people. They need to be removed. I do not see myself as the defender of the Native American. I see myself as the defender of the common white man. Yes.
Was there someone that sparked the Indian Removal Act? Or
Yes, absolutely. There was something. They had discovered gold in northern Georgia. And the state of Georgia wanted to get rid of the Cherokee Indians living on these gold. Now, it was very little amount of gold, but they had no idea how much gold was there. The state of Georgia wanted to get the Cherokee people off that land so that they could exploit that gold, whatever gold was there.
So did they think that the whole South was filled with gold?
No. I mean, Georgia, look. I mean, why is this Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia? Because Georgia is going to be the first state to say, all right, you guys need to go. Jackson is going to follow Georgia's lead and say, all right, well, if we're moving them from Georgia, let's just remove them from the entire Southeast, because they've been a problem since I've been around. So, yes, there is an incident that gets the ball rolling. Now, when the Cherokee take their case to the Supreme Court decides in favor of the Cherokee and says, look, what you're doing, you cannot do. A state, remember, John Marshall, power of the federal government over the states. John Marshall argues that the state of Georgia cannot just arbitrarily remove Native Americans from their soil. There is a process you go through. You have to negotiate a treaty, which is the way it's been done since the days of George Washington. And so John Marshall says, you must stop Indian removal. And Andrew Jackson steps in and says, yeah, well, John Marshall's made his decision. Now let him enforce it. Does John Marshall have a Supreme Court army? Does John Marshall have a Supreme Court police force? No! So he can sit. Andrew Jackson's attitude is, John Marshall can sit there and issue all the rulings he wants. I'm the president. I've got the army at my disposal. I can do what I want here. And my job is to protect the white man, the common white man. That's my job. And if removing Native Americans is a means to an end, then damn it, that's what we're going to do. And you get the passage of something called the Indian Removal Act in 1830. Which leads to the Trail of Tears. Now, I know you all had the Trail of Tears in middle school. This is the forced relocation of Native Americans from all the land east of the Mississippi River to areas west of the Mississippi River, predominantly what today is Oklahoma. The Cherokee fought back by taking their case to the Supreme Court. Other tribes are going to fight back with more conventional means. For instance, the Seminole Indians, led by Osceola, are going to fight against American troops in Florida in what becomes known as the Second Seminole War. The First Seminole War was when Andrew Jackson invaded Florida after the War of 1812. So Andrew Jackson has had experience with these guys. He knows the cut of their jib. The other Indian tribes that are going to fight back are actually tribes that live in Illinois. Because this is the Indian Removal Act takes what Georgia was doing and just says, all right, all the Indian tribes east of the Mississippi River need to move. Everybody needs to move. Go. Out. In Illinois, you have what's known as the Black Hawk War. This is the Sauk and the Fox tribes fighting back against the American removal. Now, the only reason the Black Hawk War is even remotely memorable, aside because it only lasted a year, and aside from the fact that Chicago has a hockey team called the Blackhawks, that's what it's named, is Chief Blackhawk. Chief Blackhawk. The only reason that this is even remotely memorable is because it is the first time in the historic record you see this guy. That is Abe Lincoln, the rail splitter, the country lawyer, captain of his army regiment in the Black Hawk War. First time you see Abraham Lincoln's name in the record, in the public record, as captain in the United States Army. Fighting against the Indians, although he never saw battle. Abraham Lincoln never saw battle. He said, the closest I ever came to battle was having my troops charge fields of onions. That's it. Just training. Just a lot of training. All right, so Indian removal, done. Tariff controversy, avoided. Spoils, opening opportunities for people. And to make matters even better, it's my birthday. John Marshall dies. Oh yeah, everything's looking up Jackson. So here's another obstacle to Andrew Jackson removed by the hand of God. And so Jackson is able to name his own Chief Justice, a loyal Chief Justice who will do Andrew Jackson's bidding. And that guy's name is Roger Brooke Tawney. Previously, he had been the Secretary of the Treasury. And he is almost the opposite of John Marshall. John Marshall believed in the sanctity of contracts and big business. Roger Tawney hated monopolies and big businesses because he thought it hurt the little guy. John Marshall believed in the supremacy of the federal government over the states. Roger Tawney believed in states' rights. So it's like a flip in philosophy, judicial philosophy. And, important for you guys, he's from the state of Maryland. As a matter of fact, if you go up on the Capitol grounds in Annapolis, there is a huge freaking statue of Roger Brooke Tawney sitting in a chair up there. The first case that Tawney argues, the Charles River Bridge Company versus the Warren Bridge Company, the ruling comes out that competition is good. Monopolies are bad. Monopolies hurt the little guy. This was an attempt by a competing bridge company to build a toll bridge over the Charles River in Boston to get from Boston to Cambridge. And the Charles River Bridge Company said, no. We have the monopoly on bridge crossings to Cambridge. And Tawney says, no. You can have 13 bridges there if you like, because competition drives prices down and helps the little guy. So right from the get-go, his first big case, Roger Tawney is going to demonstrate that he supports the idea of the little guy and not big business. So there's a new sheriff in town. Now, by the time you get to around the 1832 election, Andrew Jackson in his first term has managed to anger a lot of people. Who has he angered? The elites. Indians.
South Carolina.
South Carolina's angry. Calhoun is angry.
Calhoun's done.
Calhoun's toast. Henry Clay always there. And so what winds up happening is getting an opposition to the Democratic Party that is made up of people whom Andrew Jackson has angered. So there's not really anything holding this opposition together except that they don't like Andrew Jackson. They believe that he is expanding the powers of the presidency too far. As a matter of fact, Henry Clay is primarily concerned about Jackson's use of the veto. In 1830, Henry Clay gets passed through Congress a pet project called the Maysville Road Bill. It would have built a road from Louisville, Kentucky to Maysville, Kentucky. And it would have been federally funded. Wait a minute, where's Henry Clay from? Kentucky. Henry Clay's trying to bring home the bacon to his constituents so he can say, hey, look what I've done for the people of Kentucky. I've used my power and prestige to get a works project in Kentucky for you. Re-elect me. That's what politicians do. I mean, why else would there be a naval base in the state of West Virginia? There is a naval base in the state of West Virginia. Naval base!
What?
There's no water next to West Virginia, but there's a naval base there today because the senator who had been senator there for 50 years got a naval base built there. Jobs for West Virginians. Re-elect me. Look what I've done for you. I got that. I'm aware of this. Jackson takes this Maysville Road and he vetoes it. Now, the idea of the veto in the Constitution was as an executive check against the legislature to make sure that the legislature wasn't out of control. Jackson, in his veto message, says, I'm vetoing this because I don't like it. I don't like the bill, and I don't like Henry Clay. That's his reason for vetoing the bill. You can't just veto a bill because you don't like it and you don't like the guy who sponsored it. But he did it, and that's why they've got this cartoon here, King Andrew I of veto memory, stamping out the Constitution of the United States, acting with extreme powers that the founders had never envisioned for the president. And so the opposition to Jackson is going to coalesce around, this anti-Jackson ideology. He's using the veto too much. He's abusing states' rights. He's ignoring the Supreme Court. He's expanding the power of the presidency beyond anything we've seen since Thomas Jefferson, who, by the way, was also a limited government guy.
Morning, Southern. Your morning announcements will be on shortly.
And I mean, guys, just so you know how deep this resentment goes, Andrew Jackson is the first president that they tried to kill. Now, the assassination attempt fails. It's the guy's got two pistols, and both of them misfire, and so Jackson takes his cane and beats the crap out of him, which is just the kind of guy Jackson is. And you've got third parties emerging, believing that the government is unresponsive to the needs of the people. The anti-Masonic Party, which holds the first political convention and writes the first political platform, something new for political parties, is going to be a new and innovative thing. But it's all a reaction against Jackson. The opposition, however, is going to
Good morning,
coalesce
Southern. Today is
around
Monday,
these guys.
December 2nd, a B-Day. Please stand for your Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please have a seat. Attention, all informational
underwater
meeting on
robotics.
Tuesday, December 3rd during Bulldog Block in room D107. No previous experience or special talents necessary. For further information, see Ms. Bukowski in room D107 on Tuesday.
Opposition to Jackson, however,
Reserve your place for the Wellness Wheel
is
game
going to
be held on
coalesce
December
around
5th in
Henry
Gym
Clay,
Bulldog
zombie Henry Clay,
See a Wellness Club member for a pass.
Daniel
to
Webster
win
from
prizes.
Massachusetts,
Wellness Wheel game.
and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. These guys become
How do you
the
indicate
leaders
Tuesday
of the
during
opposition
Bulldog Block
to
for
Andrew
all
Jackson,
interrupted
and it
in
is
the
from
South
these
Conference
guys
14th
that you
and
get the
18th.
creation.
Hey, Southern, here's a riddle for you. What do Disney World and Mr. Procaccini have in common? Come to Southern High School Drama Company's production of A Night of Comedy this weekend and find out. Featuring skits from Saturday Night Live, I Love Lucy, and The Carol Burnett Show. This night is sure to leave you laughing and wanting more.
Okay.
Shows are Friday at
These
7
guys
p.m. and
become the
Saturday
basis,
at
the
2
backbone
and
of
7
the Whig
p.m.
Party.
Tickets are
And this is
$5
really
for
the
students,
emergence
$8
of a
for
new
adults.
two-party
Please come and
system that
support
you
the
see
new
there. The
Southern High
blue
School Drama
Democrats,
Company.
the yellow Whigs. The Whigs are
Wellness
held
National Art
together
Society will be
simply by their
off
hatred of Andrew
schedule,
Jackson.
making
Notice that the
Thursday,
Whig Party
the
doesn't
next
last
2
very
weeks.
long.
Create
Because once
and
Andrew
donate
Jackson's
our
out of the
annual
picture,
handmade
there's not really
sketchbooks
much to
for
hold that
teenagers
party
in the
together.
violent shelter. Plan to stay after school this Thursday and next
All right.
to get them done and
Next
shipped in
time,
time for Christmas.
We're going to look at the Bent War, the election of 1832, the presidency of Martin Van Buren, and how the Whigs are able to beat the Democrats at their own game in 1840 with the election of William Henry Harrison.
Selected to perform in the Maryland High School Dance